The car smelled faintly of leather and cold air conditioning. Vine sat with her hands clasped in her lap, staring out of the window as the highway blurred past. She could see her own reflection in the glass, a pale face, tired eyes, and a tight-lipped expression that had been there since the morning. Beside her, Jungkook drove with one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting casually on the gear shift. His posture was perfect, as always, calm, composed, detached. His jaw was set, his profile sharp against the late morning sunlight, streaming in through the windshield. They hadn't spoken much since they had left the city. It wasn't because of a fight, at least not a loud, obvious one. The truth was, they didn't fight. They barely talked at all. Their marriage had been arranged just over 2 months ago, and while Jungkook was respectful and polite, he also was distant. He kept to his work, his phone, his own world. When his parents had insisted they take a vacation together, it will be good for you two for some time away just for yourself, his mother had said. Wine hadn't known how to refuse. So here they were, the two near strangers trapped in the same car heading toward a quiet hill station resort that was supposed to be romantic. Wine shifted slightly in her seat, trying to get comfort, but the dull ache in her lower stomach made her wince. She had felt the first strange that morning, just as she was packing her bag, and her heart sank. Of all the ways it had been with this one. She glanced at Jungkook. He didn't notice, or maybe he did and didn't care. His eyes were fixed on the road, his face unreadable. Wine pressed her hand discreetly against her stomach, counting her breaths. If she just stayed still, maybe the pain wouldn't get worse. The drive was long, winding through the hills until the city noise faded completely, replaced by the sound of wind through trees and the occasional call of birds. By the time they pulled up in front of the resort, the ache had become a constant throb. Finally, Jungkook muttered, stepping out of the car and stretching his arms. Wine followed him, trying not to let her discomfort show. The resort was beautiful, stone cottages scattered across the slope, surrounded by tall deodar trees. The air was cooler here, carrying the faint scent of pine. At check-in, the receptionist smiled at them warmly. Honeymoon suit? Wine blinked startled. Jungkook's jaw tightened slightly. Yes, he said shortly, handing over their IDs. The woman handed them a single key card. Enjoy your stay. Wine avoided Jungkook's eyes as they made their way to the cottage. The word honeymoon felt almost like a joke. Inside the room was cozy, wooden floors, a large bed with crisp white sheets, a small balcony overlooking the valley. It would have been romantic, Wine thought bitterly, if they had been different. She placed her bag on the chair and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to hide the way her shoulders slumped. You can take the bathroom first, Jungkook said. His tone was neutral. Okay, she forced a small smile and grabbed her toiletries. Once inside the bathroom, she let out a breath that had she been holding. She splashed cold water on his face, then rummaged through her bag for painkillers. She swallowed one quickly, hoping it would take effect before they had to head out for the lunch. When she emerged, Jungkook had already unpacked his bag with his usual precision. Shirts hung neatly in the wardrobe, shoes lined up by the door. You hungry? He asked. A little, she lied. In truth, the idea of food made her stomach churn, but she couldn't say no, not without raising questions. They walked to the resort's dining hall, where a buffet lunch was laid out. Wine forced herself to put a few things on her plate. Though the sight of rich curries and spicy pickles made her throat tighten. Across the table, Jungkook was quiet as usual, scrolling through the phone between bites. You don't like the food? He asked suddenly, noticing how little she had eaten. It's fine, she said quickly. I'm not just very hungry. He nodded, not pressing further, and returned to his screen. Relief and disappointment mingled in her chest. The afternoon passed slowly. Jungkook went out to explore the property, taking photos of the view. Wine stayed in the cottage, lying on the bed with the curtains drawn. Clutching a hot water bottle she had asked housekeeping to bring. She hated how weak she felt. Hated that she couldn't just enjoy this trip just like a normal person. When Jungkook returned, he looked at her for a long moment before saying, "You didn't come out?" "I was tired," she replied softly. He nodded, his face unreadable, and sat on the chair by the window, flipping open his laptop. The sound of typing filled the room. By evening, the painkillers had worn off. One could feel another wave building, a sharp, twisting cramp that made her curl her toes against the sheets. "You should get ready," Jungkook said without looking up. "Dinner starts at 7." She bit her lip. "Do we have to go?" He finally glanced at her, his brows furrowing. "You didn't want to?" "I just—" She hesitated. "I thought maybe we could order in." He studied her face for a moment, then shrugged. "If you want." "I will call room service." Relief washed through her face. She nodded quickly. They ate quietly in the cottage, sitting at the small table by the window. Jungkook had removed his laptop as though making space for her, and though the silence was still there, it didn't feel quite as heavy. When they finished, wine cleared the plates, moving slowly to hide the fact that every step sent a dull ache through her abdomen. "You look tired," he remarked as she set the last plate down. "I'm fine," she said automatically. He gave her a look, unreadable, but lingering before simply saying, "Get some rest." That night, Wine lay on the far side of the bed, her back to him, listening to the sound of his breathing as he slept. Her stomach still hurt, her body still felt heavy, but for the first time she wondered if it maybe he wasn't as cold as she had thought. He had agreed to stay in. He hadn't complained, and tomorrow she had just have to try harder to pretend everything was normal. The next morning dawned bright and cool. Sunlight filtering through the curtains. Wine woke up with a start, momentarily disoriented. The bed was empty on Jungkook's side, already cold. She sat up slowly, her body heavy and sore. The cramps hadn't gone away, if anything, they had deepened overnight. Her lower back ached, her legs felt weak, and a dull throat pulsed low in her stomach. From the faint sound outside, she guessed Jungkook was on the balcony, talking to someone on the phone. She freshened up slowly, taking another painkiller with a glass of lukewarm water. By the time she emerged, he was back inside, putting his phone away. "Morning," he said, voice neutral. "Morning." She tried to sound casual. "There is a guided hike today," he said. "They take you up to a waterfall a few kilometers away. We should go." She hesitated. The last thing she wanted was to hike uphill in the state. But she couldn't bring herself to refuse our ride. Not when the trip had been forced them, partly because everyone thought they spent too little time together. "Sure," she said softly. Breakfast was a quiet affair: toasted bread, coffee for him, tea for her. Wine forced herself to eat, hoping it would give her enough energy to get through the day. They joined a small group near the reception, a few couples, a guide with his walking stick, and two families with children. The air was crisp and cool, the kind that usually made wine feel alive, but today every step felt heavier than the last. The path was scenic, winding through tall pine trees with the faint gurgle of stream somewhere nearby. Jungkook walked a few paces ahead, his hands in his jacket pockets, occasionally glancing back to check if she was keeping up. You okay? He asked once when she slowed down. I'm fine, she said quickly, forcing a small smile. But she wasn't fine. Sweat was gathering at her back of the neck, despite the cool air. The cramps came in waves now, sharp enough to make her bite the inside of her cheek to keep her from groaning. By the time they reached the waterfall, she was exhausted. The guide encouraged everyone to sit and rest, take photos. Jungkook walked close to the walls, putting out his phone to take a few shots. Vine found a large rock to sit on, clutching her back tightly. She focused on the sound of rushing water, willing herself to breathe through the pain. When Jungkook returned, he crouched slightly to meet her eye level. You don't look good, he said bluntly. I'm just tired, she whispered, his brows furrowed. Tired enough that you are this pale? She looked away, unsure what to say. The hike back was worse. Every downward step jarred her stomach. She stumbled once, catching herself on a tree. Jungkook noticed. Give me your bag, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. It's fine. Give it, he said again. She hesitated before walking slowly, handing it over. He hung it over his shoulder and kept walking, but slower now, as if matching her pace deliberately. By the time they returned to the resort, Vine was ready to collapse. She excused herself as soon as they entered the cottage, retreating to the bathroom. When she came out, Jungkook was standing by the bed, arms crossed. What's wrong with you? He asked quietly. She froze. Nothing. Don't lie to me, Vine. His tone wasn't angry, but just firm, serious. She bit her lips, staring at the floor. You have been off since yesterday, she continued, barely eating, barely talking, and today you almost fainted on the trail. I didn't. You did. He said flatly, silence stretched between them. Finally, Vine said softly, It is cramps. Jungkook blinked, caught off guard. Cramps? She nodded, suddenly embarrassed. It's that time of the month. Understanding drowned in his expression. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly. And you have been walking around all day like this? He asked. I didn't want to ruin the trip, she murmured. He let out a slow breath, sat down on the bed, rubbing the back of his neck. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. You should have said something, he said finally. You would have just thought I was making excuses, she whispered before she could stop herself. Is that what you think of me? His head jerked up at that. She looked away, her throat tight. For a moment there was only the sound of wind outside, rustling to the trees. Then Jungkook stood and walked to the phone on the bedside table. What are you doing? She asked. Calling room service? He said simply, You are not going anywhere this evening. An hour later, there was soup and tea on the table, a hot water bottle placed carefully near her side of the bed, and the curtains drawn to block out the last rays of the setting sun. Vine sat propped against the headboard, staring at the steaming bowl of soup. You didn't have to do all this, she said quietly. You are not well, he replied, pulling up a chair to sit across from her. The least I can do is make sure you don't get worse. Something warm flickered in her chest at his matter of the fact tone. She ate slowly, the warmth soothing her. Jungkook didn't speak much, but he didn't open his laptop either. He just sat there as though keeping watch. Later that night, when she lay curled on her side, she felt the bed dip slightly. Jungkook had chosen to sit on the edge, scrolling through his phone. "You should sleep," she murmured. "I will," he said quietly. There was a pause. Then softer, almost hesitant, he added, "You don't have to hide things like this from me, Vine." Her breath caught. "I wasn't hiding," she began. "You were," he said gently, but not unkindly. "And I get it, but you don't have to." She turned her back to look at him. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Not indifference, not irritation, something closer to concern. The rain started before dawn, pattering softly against the roof, then building into a steady rhythm. By the time Wine stirred, the world outside the windows was shrouded in mist, and the sound of water dripping from the eaves filled the air. For once there was no rush to get up, no planned hike, no group activity, no pleasure, no pressure to step outside and pretend everything was perfect. She rolled onto her back, stretching slowly. The cramps were still there, a dull heaviness in her lower stomach, but they felt less sharp than yesterday. The other side of the bed was empty, but warm Jungkook had gotten up not long ago. A moment later the door opened and he stepped inside carrying a tray. "You're awake," he said simply, setting the tray on the small table by the window. "What's that?" she asked, her voice still husky with sleep. "Breakfast?" "They were only doing a limited menu because of the weather, so I brought it here." Wine sat up, brushing her hair back. She hadn't expected him to think of her. "Thank you," she said softly. She shrugged, as though it wasn't a big deal. "Figured you wouldn't want to go to the dining hall today." He was right. The thought of walking through the rain, sitting in a crowded space, pretending to smile, it sounded exhausting. They ate together quietly, the only sound the patter of rain on the windows. Jungkook passed her the jam without being asked. She noticed he hadn't chosen tea instead of coffee, as so in silent solitary. After breakfast, the rain only grew heavier. Sheets of water slid down the glass, blurring the view of the valley. Wine curled up on the couch with a blanket, a hot water bottle tucked against her stomach. Jungkook sat near the window, laptop open on his knees. But he wasn't fully focused. Every now and then, his eyes flicked to her. "You should lie down," he said at one point. "I'm fine," she replied, though she shifted slightly on the couch. Few moments later, a particularly bad cramp made her flinch. She tried to hide it, but he caught it. Without a word, Jungkook closed his laptop and stood. He disappeared into the bathroom and returned with a towel-wrapped hot water refill. "Switch?" he said quietly, holding out the warm bottle. Her throat tightened. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he said just as quietly. She accepted it, pressing it against his stomach. "Thanks," she murmured. He sat back down, closer this time, as though silently keeping her company. The day stretched lazily, the storm hemming them in together. Wine dozed for a while, half aware of Jungkook moving around quietly, ordering tea, answering a phone call in a low voice, pulling the curtains close when the room grew too bright. When she woke up again, he was sitting in the chair opposite her, book in hand. "You read?" she asked, surprised. "Sometimes," he said, not looking up. "What is it?" "Some novel I found here. Mystery." She smiled faintly. "I didn't know you liked those." He glanced at her then, his expression softening. "You never asked." The words weren't sharp, but they landed with weight. She realized with a pang that she really hadn't asked. She had spent so much time resenting his distance that she had never tried to cross the space between them. By late afternoon, the rain had returned into a misty drizzle. The two of them sat by the window watching droplets race each other down the glass. "You should have told me sooner," he said suddenly. "About what?" "This," he said, nodding slightly toward her stomach, hesitated. "I didn't think you would want to hear about it." His jaw tightened. "Why do you think that?" "You are always so busy, so distant. I didn't want to bother you with something so small." Jungkook turned toward her fully. "Why? You were in pain. That's not small." Her breath caught at a quiet conviction in his voice. "I'm not good at this," he admitted after a pause. "I don't always know what to say or what you need, but I don't want you to think that I don't care." She stared at him, her chest tight. "You could have fooled me," she said softly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. He didn't flinch, but his eyes darkened. "I know I haven't made it easy. I keep things to myself, work, thoughts, everything, but I'm trying." Something in his voice, low, steady, almost vulnerable, made her throat ache. "I can't tell," she whispered. Their eyes held for a moment, the sound of rain filling the silence between them. When evening came, they ordered dinner in again, sitting across from each other at the little table. The silence was no longer uncomfortable, it was almost companionable. Jungkook asked her what books she liked to read, what music she listened to, and for once Wine let herself answer honestly. Later, when she climbed into the bed, Jungkook switched off the main lights and sat down beside her. "Better?" he asked, nodding toward her stomach. "A little," she admitted. He reached over and adjusted the blanket around her. The gesture was so unexpectedly gentle that she felt her stomach caught. "You don't have to do that," she said quietly. "I know." He met her gaze. "I want to." Something shifted in her, then a quiet click, like a door opening just enough to let the light through. She smiled, a real smile this time, and for the first time since their marriage, she didn't feel like she was in this alone. The next morning, the sky was clear again. They packed their bags in comfortable silence in the car as the hills rolled by outside. Wine herself was glancing at Jungkook. He noticed. "What?" "Nothing," she said, smiling faintly. "Just thinking this trip wasn't so bad after all." His lips curved just slightly, but enough to warm her. "Good," he said quietly, "because I was thinking we should do it again. Maybe next time somewhere by the beach." She blinked fast, and for the first time the idea didn't fill her with dread.